If you think about it, most of the problems that we face today are global. That means that we need a different type of leadership to address those problems. As Einstein said, the thinking that created today's problems is not the same type of thinking that will resolve them. My colleagues and I have completed a study on expert cognition and global leaders. We chose this topic because we were interested in how really good global leaders function. So we chose people in our selection criteria who had been nominated as really effective people, who had worked in this role for 10 years or more, because we know it takes 10 years to become expert, and who had good intercultural skills, and who were primarily successful change agents, because we believe strongly that global leaders are different from global managers because they're change agents. So our findings showed that they have a lot in common with domestic leaders, but there are also some things that are really different. And we found this by using a methodology called cognitive task analysis. This is a methodology that was designed to distinguish between experts and novices. It involves choosing a critical incident, and in our case, the critical incident was tell us about a challenging, successful global change effort that you carried out, one that was complex and that a novice could not do. So that was the critical incident. And then, in our interviews, after they describe that, we go back and ask them a series of questions that relate to expert cognition, what cues they were paying attention to, what strategies they used, and finally, how would a novice find that difficult? So these interviews were really fascinating. And as I mentioned, our findings showed that there were some things they have in common, of course, with domestic leaders, but some ways that they were very different. And if I were to say what makes these people global, the answer would be, first of all, they read people much more closely. They know that they don't know. Global leaders have followers from a variety of cultures. They may have subordinates from 30 or 40 different cultures, so they're not going to be an expert on a particular culture. But they know that they have to pay attention to these issues. So they watch people like a hawk when things don't make sense. They either ask for more information or they go to someone else who knows, a cultural mentor who can explain things to them. They also are good at code switching. They adapt their leadership style to the expectations of their followers, and they do that seamlessly without looking like a phony. They boundary span to a much greater degree than domestic leaders do, because they're dealing with so many other entities. One of our subjects was involved with in the aerospace industry, and he was actually mediating between aerospace companies, foreign governments, the U.S. government, the Department of Defense, and in his one critical incident, he described about 25 different entities that he was dealing with and managing those boundaries. Those are probably the key things that make them global. But in addition, the ways that they describe their jobs are very interesting. They describe their work context as challenging, high risk, involving tasks that haven't been done before. In many cases, they were the first people to do what they were trying to do. For example, one person was trying to standardize how internet cable was brought into households in the United States and elsewhere. So he had to form a consortium of people from other high-tech companies. He had no formal power over them, but he brought them together, and together they figured out a standardized way of doing this. Another person tried to prevent the Asian economic crisis by working with various countries. So their jobs are high stakes. What they're doing is often unknown, and there's tremendous ambiguity in their work. When they described how they dealt with that ambiguity, I also found that interesting. It was as if they were setting out on across an ocean, an uncharted ocean, and they were the captain of a ship, but they carefully gathered who was going to be on that ship with them. And then They relied on process of navigation, if we follow the ship metaphor, and trusted that somehow this would work out even though they didn't know where they were going. So they carefully chose their team. They're very picky about who they were getting on the team, and they took a lot of time to develop trust on that team, even though these were not social science people. When they described what they were doing, they put it into boxes, and one box was often developing trust, which I think is amazing for people who were mainly engineers and scientists. So after developing that trust, then they relied on a process they had learned in their career and trusted that they would be able to come up with an answer to something that no one else had ever done. So what are the implications of this? I think there are several implications for selection of people who could be global leaders. You know, we're looking for a high degree of cognitive complexity and social acuity and behavioral flexibility, a high degree of integrity, because as they're doing their code switching, if people don't basically trust them, that will simply look like manipulation. I think there are many implications for training. If we understand how these expert leaders have developed and what that looks like, then we can try to accelerate that training process with other people. And that's what we're trying to do in our Global Leadership Lab. And then finally, I think we can, it's similar, along similar lines, we can try to replicate the situations that they face in our training and development efforts. Thank you.